We'll be taking a deep dive into verse 22 of Adi Shankaracharya's Bhaja Govindam.
Okay.
It's a verse that really grapples with this idea of the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth.
Right.
You know, that concept of samsara.
Samsara, yeah.
And I thought it'd be interesting to get your take on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Samsara is often depicted as this kind of like endless ocean, right?
Right.
And it's a powerful analogy that Shankaracharya uses to convey this feeling of being kind of swept along by forces that are beyond our control.
Yeah.
And what's really captivating, I think, is how this idea, it kind of resonates across cultures, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Like think about the Greek myth of Sisyphus.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, eternally pushing that boulder uphill.
Oh, right, right.
Or even like the Buddhist concept of the wheel of becoming.
Mm-hmm.
All of these, they kind of tap into this, I think, universal human experience.
Yeah.
The struggle with our limitations and the longing for something more.
So are we saying that all these different philosophical and religious traditions sort of converged on this idea of an endless cycle? Because it is like a common human experience.
It is fascinating, isn't it? And, you know, while the like specific interpretations of it might differ, the underlying theme of being bound to a cycle of suffering,
Right.
it just seems to resonate across different cultures.
Yeah.
And this verse from Bhaja Govindam doesn't really sugarcoat things either, you know? It's states very starkly, again and again, one is born, and again, one dies. Once more, one takes rest in the mother's womb.
Yeah, it's not exactly a feel-good mantra. Is it?
No, it's not. Not at all.
It's almost like a warning.
It does, right. It's like it jolts us out of any complacency.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront the relentless nature of this cycle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're caught in this loop of suffering driven by our desires and attachments, much like a small boat being tossed about by these relentless waves.
Okay, so I see where the ocean analogy comes in.
Yeah.
But how does this idea of karma fit into all of this?
Right.
Is it really as simple as what goes around comes around?
Yeah, that's, you know, people say that, but the concept of karma is often oversimplified. It's not about like a cosmic scorecard or punishment.
Right.
It's more nuanced than that.
Okay.
Imagine karma as a series of interconnected causes and effects.
Mm-hmm.
So every action, thought, and intention creates a ripple
Yeah.
that influences our future experiences.
Okay.
It's this chain of actions and consequences that binds us to the cycle of samsara.
So we're essentially creating our own currents in this ocean.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
We're not just passive passengers, right?
Right.
Our choices, our actions, even our unexamined beliefs, they all contribute to this cycle.
Right.
And this brings us to the concept of avidya,
Okay.
which Vedanta identifies as like the root cause of our suffering.
Avidya meaning ignorance.
Right.
But what exactly are we ignorant of?
So avidya at its core is the ignorance of our true nature.
Okay.
We identify with our physical bodies, our thoughts and emotions,
Right.
mistaking them for who we truly are.
Yeah.
And we become so entangled in this illusion of separateness
Yeah.
that we lose sight of our connection to something larger, you know,
Mm-hmm.
something beyond our limited selves.
Okay, so we've got this karma, the consequences of our actions, keeping us bound to this cycle. Then we have this avidya,
Right.
this fundamental ignorance about our true nature, and it's fueling the whole process.
Exactly.
So how do we even begin to navigate out of this?
Well, that's where the second part of this verse offers a glimmer of hope.
Okay.
It's a direct plea. O Murāri, by your boundless mercy, protect me from this endless cycle.
So Murāri being another name for Lord Krishna.
Exactly.
So Shankaracharya is suggesting that we need divine intervention to break free.
Well,
Are we essentially powerless in all of this?
I wouldn't say powerless. I think it's more about recognizing our limitations, you know?
Okay.
We can struggle against the current,
Yeah.
try to steer our little boat through sheer willpower.
Mm-hmm.
But the verse suggests a different approach.
Yeah.
It highlights the importance of surrender,
Okay.
of acknowledging that we may need help navigating this vast ocean.
Surrender is a tricky word, though.
It is.
Does it mean just giving up,
Right.
resigning ourselves to fate?
No, not at all.
No.
True surrender, it isn't about passivity.
Right.
It's about humility,
Yeah.
about recognizing that we may not have all the answers.
Yeah.
It's a willingness to let go of the ego's need to control everything
Mhm.
and open ourselves to a power greater than ourselves.
Okay.
This isn't about dependence. It's about acknowledging a reality that extends beyond our limited perception.
So it's more like realizing that we are not the only ones with a paddle in the water,
Yes,
that there's a force much bigger than ourselves at play.
exactly. And this brings us to the concept of grace,
Grace,
right?
that divine intervention.
Mm-hmm.
But if our actions create karma, how can we possibly be worthy of grace?
That's a great question, and that is a question for our next deep dive segment, where we'll explore grace, liberation, and the role they play in navigating this seemingly endless cycle of samsara.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it. We ended last time talking about grace.
We did.
And how surrendering to something bigger than ourselves could be like a key to navigating this ocean of samsara.
Right.
But I'm still kind of wrestling with this whole concept of karma.
I understand.
If we're constantly generating karma through our actions,
yeah,
how can grace possibly play a role in our liberation?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of how liberation or moksha is understood in Hindu philosophy.
Okay.
It's not about like erasing our past actions or somehow becoming immune to karma,
Right.
It's about a fundamental shift in perspective.
So we're not talking about getting a get-out-of-jail-free card from the universe.
No, not exactly.
There's no cosmic eraser.
No.
Okay.
Think of it more like transcending the framework within which karma operates. Remember, we talked about avidya, the ignorance of our true nature. Well, liberation is about dispelling that ignorance and recognizing who we really are at our core.
Okay, so knowledge, or jnana, is like a key part of this path to liberation.
Yeah.
But what kind of knowledge are we talking about? It can't just be intellectual knowledge, right?
Right.
I mean, I can read books about Vedanta and still be stuck in my old patterns.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Jnana goes beyond just book smarts or intellectual understanding.
Okay.
It's about direct experiential knowledge of the self.
Okay.
The Atman, which is pure, eternal, and ultimately one with Brahman.
Okay, but how do we move from like intellectual understanding to this direct experience of the self?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Is it just a sudden flash of insight?
Well,
or is it years of dedicated meditation?
the path unfolds differently for everyone.
Okay.
But it often involves a combination of self-inquiry, contemplation, and spiritual practice, which is known as sadhana.
So sadhana is essentially putting the knowledge into action. It's about the doing, not just the knowing.
Yes, exactly.
Can you give some concrete examples of what that might look like?
Sure, it can take many forms.
Okay.
Meditation is a powerful tool for stilling the mind.
Right.
And cultivating inner awareness. Yoga, with its emphasis on physical and mental discipline, can help us connect with our inner energy and become more present.
Okay.
Chanting mantras can create a vibration that uplifts the mind and evokes a sense of connection to the divine.
So we have jnana, the knowledge of the self.
Yes.
And sadhana, the practice that helps us realize that knowledge.
Right.
But earlier we were also talking about grace and surrender. How do those fit into this equation?
They are intricately woven into the entire fabric of this journey.
Okay.
As we deepen our understanding and engage in spiritual practice, we begin to create space for grace to enter our lives.
Okay.
It's like tuning a radio to the right frequency.
Okay.
The more we align ourselves with the truth of our being, the more receptive we become to the flow of grace.
So grace isn't something we earn or like force.
Yeah.
It's more like a natural consequence of aligning ourselves with our true nature.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Okay.
Grace is always present, but our perception of it is often clouded by our ego's attachments and limiting beliefs.
Right.
As we cultivate jnana and sadhana, these clouds begin to dissipate.
Yeah.
And we become more attuned to the subtle workings of grace.
This makes me think about another concept you mentioned, bhakti, or devotion.
Yes.
How does devotion to a personal god like Krishna relate to this path of knowledge and practice?
Bhakti is another powerful pathway to liberation.
Okay.
It's the cultivation of loves and surrender towards the divine.
Okay.
And this love, it can act as a powerful catalyst for dissolving the ego's barriers and opening the heart to the experience of unity.
So jnana, bhakti, sadhana, and grace all kind of work in concert.
Yeah.
It's not an either situation.
Exactly. They support and enhance each other.
Right.
The path to liberation isn't a linear one. It's a dynamic interplay of these different elements, each contributing to our awakening.
Okay, so let's say we're diligently cultivating knowledge, engaging in spiritual practice, surrendering to something bigger than ourselves, and even cultivating devotion.
Yes.
What actually happens when we reach liberation?
Right.
What does moksha really look like?
That's the ultimate mystery, isn't it?
It is.
It's a state that's said to be beyond description, beyond the grasp of the mind.
Right.
But the scriptures offer glimpses, using metaphors to point towards this ineffable experience.
So we can't really wrap our heads around it.
It's difficult.
But can you at least give us a few of those metaphors?
Sure.
Those glimpses into what liberation might entail.
One way to conceptualize liberation is as a state of complete freedom.
Okay.
Freedom from suffering, freedom from the cycle of birth and death.
Right.
And most importantly, freedom from the limitations of the ego. Imagine a boundless expanse, a vast ocean of pure awareness,
right,
where the individual wave dissolves back into the infinite ocean of existence.
Okay.
That's one way to visualize the state of moksha.
Wow, that's a powerful image, but it also seems incredibly abstract.
It is.
How does this translate into like a lived experience?
Yeah.
Does a liberated being just sit in a cave meditating all day?
Liberation isn't about withdrawing from the world.
Okay.
It's about a radical shift in perspective.
Okay.
Imagine someone who's no longer driven by fear, desire, or the need for external validation.
Yeah.
They act from a place of deep wisdom and compassion.
Okay.
Seeing the divine in all beings. They live in a state of profound peace and joy, regardless of external circumstances.
That sounds incredible, but also a bit like a superhuman feat.
Right.
Are you saying that liberation is only attainable for like a select few?
Not at all.
Okay.
The teachings tell us that the potential for liberation exists within each of us.
Okay.
It's our true nature, our birthright.
So liberation isn't just some like distant concept.
No.
It's something we can actually aspire to in our everyday lives.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the most practical part of our deep dive.
Okay.
How can we apply these teachings to our modern lives, our relationships, our careers, our everyday experiences?
That's a question I'm definitely eager to explore.
Good.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
From the depths of samsara to the heights of liberation.
Yes.
But how do we bridge the gap between these profound concepts and our everyday reality?
Right.
That's what we'll pick up in the final part of our deep dive. So we've spent the last two segments exploring this vast ocean of samsara, the concept of liberation, and the different paths that can lead us to greater freedom.
We have.
But now I kind of want to like bring it all home.
Yeah.
How do we actually apply these ancient teachings to our modern, often chaotic lives?
Right.
How do we integrate jnana, bhakti, and sahana into our daily routines, our relationships, our careers?
Right. Well, it's a process of weaving these threads of wisdom into the fabric of our lives, not necessarily like a complete overhaul of everything we do.
Right.
Remember, even small shifts in perspective can have a ripple effect.
So we're not talking about renouncing the world and becoming hermits.
No.
We can still enjoy like a good cup of coffee and binge watch our favorite shows.
Of course. Liberation isn't about deprivation or escaping from life.
Oh, okay.
It's about engaging with life from a more awakened and balanced place.
Right.
It's about recognizing that even the most mundane activities can become opportunities for practice.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
So how do we start to see those opportunities?
Right.
Can you give us some concrete examples of how we can apply these teachings to our everyday lives?
Sure. Let's go back to verse 22 of Bhaja Govindam. It starts with that stark image of the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Again and again, one is born, and again, one dies.
Right.
This isn't meant to be morbid. It's a call to recognize the impermanence of everything.
So are you saying that just remembering that everything is temporary can be like a form of practice in itself?
Absolutely. When we truly grasp the fleeting nature of things, it can shift our priorities.
Yeah.
Loosen the grip of our attachments and help us appreciate the present moment more fully.
So instead of clinging to things,
yes,
outcomes, relationships, we can learn to kind of embrace change, flow with the current, rather than constantly fighting against it.
Exactly. This doesn't mean that we become passive or indifferent.
Right.
It's about recognizing that everything is in flux, that change is the only constant.
Right.
And this understanding can bring a sense of peace and freedom, even amidst challenging circumstances.
Okay, so that's one practical application, remembering impermanence.
Yeah.
What about the idea of surrender? How does that translate into our daily lives?
Right.
I mean, we can't just throw our hands up in the air and say, universe, take the wheel,
right,
every time we face a decision.
True surrender is much more nuanced than that. It's not about like giving up responsibility or becoming passive.
Oh, yeah.
It's about cultivating a willingness to let go of the ego's need to control everything.
Can you give us an example of what that might look like in practice?
Sure. Imagine you're facing a difficult situation at work. Instead of getting caught up in anxiety and trying to force a particular outcome, you can practice surrender by acknowledging your limitations, asking for guidance, and trusting that things will unfold as they need to.
So it's about releasing that tight grip on the steering wheel.
Yes.
Allowing for the possibility that there might be a better route,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's not the one we initially envisioned.
Precisely. And this attitude of surrender can be applied to all areas of our lives. Relationships, health challenges, creative endeavors.
Right.
It's about cultivating a sense of trust, knowing that we are not alone in navigating the complexities of life.
This brings us back to the idea of grace.
Yes,
You mentioned earlier that grace is always present,
it is.
but we often block it with our own limiting beliefs and attachments.
Yeah.
How can we become more receptive to grace in our daily lives?
One powerful way is through the cultivation of gratitude.
Okay.
When we focus on what we appreciate, when we acknowledge the blessings in our lives, even the small ones,
Right.
it shifts our energy and opens us to the flow of grace.
So it's like we're sending out a signal saying, hey, universe, I'm open to receiving.
Yes.
I'm grateful for all the good things in my life, and I'm ready for more.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Okay.
And this practice of gratitude can extend beyond just our personal lives. We can cultivate gratitude for the beauty of nature,
Yeah.
for the kindness of strangers, for the challenges that help us grow.
So we're not just asking for grace, we're also actively creating a space for it to enter our lives.
Exactly. And as we become more receptive to grace, it can manifest in surprising ways. Synchronicities, unexpected opportunities, intuitive insights, the support of others.
This all sounds amazing, but let's be honest. We live in a world that often feels very far from grace. We're bombarded with negativity, stress, and constant demands on our time and energy.
Right.
How do we maintain this sense of peace and openness amidst all the chaos?
That's where our daily practices, our sadhana, become essential.
Right.
Meditation, even for a few minutes each day, can help us calm the mind and connect with our inner stillness. Yoga can release tension in the body and bring us into the present moment.
Right.
Spending time in nature can help us reconnect with the rhythms of the natural world and tap into a sense of awe and wonder.
So it's about finding those practices that help us ground ourselves, that remind us of our true nature, even when the world around us feels chaotic.
Exactly. And these practices don't have to be elaborate or time-consuming.
Okay.
Even simple acts like mindful breathing, listening to uplifting music, or just spending time in quiet reflection can make a huge difference.
What about bhakti, the path of devotion? How can we cultivate that in our daily lives?
Bhakti can be expressed in countless ways. It could be through prayer, chanting, singing devotional songs, or simply feeling a sense of love and gratitude towards a higher power.
So it's about cultivating that heart connection, that sense of loving surrender to something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And this doesn't have to be limited to a specific deity or religious tradition.
Right.
It's about tapping into that universal feeling of love and devotion, recognizing the divine spark within ourselves and all beings.
So to bring it all together, we're talking about remembering impermanence, practicing surrender, cultivating gratitude, engaging in daily practices that nourish our soul, and opening our hearts to love and devotion. These are all powerful tools for navigating the ocean of samsara and moving towards a more awakened and fulfilling life.
Beautifully summarized. And remember, the journey is as important as the destination.
Right.
It's about enjoying the process of unfolding, of discovering our true potential, and of living each day with greater awareness, purpose, and joy.
Well, thank you for guiding us through this deep dive into verse 22 of Bhaja Govindam.
You're welcome.
It's been a profound exploration of some of life's biggest questions, and I hope our listeners feel inspired to continue this journey of self-discovery and spiritual exploration.
I hope so, too.
Remember, the boundless ocean of samsara may seem daunting, but with the right tools and the willingness to surrender to something greater than ourselves, we can navigate its currents with grace and eventually reach the shores of liberation.
Beautiful.
Thanks for joining us.